Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 117. Thanks so much for joining me. An instructor in Chinese martial arts is called Sifu by her students, and the word Sifu is Cantonese for teacher. I'm joined today by Sifu Rubia, who practices and teaches Tai Chi and Qigong. Rubia is the founder of Wei Wu Tai Chi, where she provides her students with the tools to maintain health, rejuvenate their bodies, and recapture youthful energy and balance in their lives. We veer off-road a bit in this conversation, which I just love, going deep on how to connect with ancient practices in our modern world. Here's what we cover: the elements and characteristics of Tai Chi and Qigong, the benefits of these ancient practices, the role technology has in making these practices more broadly accessible, the potent combination of our practices in nature, and words of wisdom for the beginner. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Rubia shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links in the show notes to Sifu's website, where you can find her contact information, classes, and a special offer for Athena Wellness listeners. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Sifu Rubia, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Kathy. I'm honored, and I feel it's a privilege to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. So please share a bit about who you are and what you do.
Who am I?
We start with deep questions here. Who are you?
Who am I? Well, okay. So I see myself as an entrepreneur. I've always kind of been entrepreneurial with my endeavors in either creative or business. I've always kind of went to the beat of my own drum kind of thing. So that's kind of my personality, and I'm very empathic, so deeply tuned in and very sensitive, which makes me a bit of a recluse. But, with all of those things comes the healing properties of a person. So as a healer, I have a solar consultant business. So I'm doing my very small part in trying to heal the planet. So I do solar, and I also right now I have produced and I'm currently producing more online Qigong and Tai Chi courses that are introductory courses for individuals who are curious about Qi development and Tai Chi principles. So I've been working on that since COVID made us all pivot. So that's where I am right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do my part in healing the world, and healing the planet, and healing people. So my small part.
It is quite a portfolio. How did you come to find the practices of Qigong and Tai Chi?
I started with the yoga practice. So yoga brought me to Tai Chi and Qigong. And really it was a back injury from a miscarriage that brought me to Qigong, specifically because my yoga practice was aggravating my back. So I started there. It was through an injury, and then it developed into something much bigger. And it brought me down a spiritual path, a path of alchemy and self-realization. And it continues to kind of mold me the more I practice.
As all good practices do.
Yes.
So for our listeners, let's suppose they were interested in starting a new practice, but were unfamiliar with Tai Chi and Qigong. How would you describe each? And what are some of the similarities and the differences between the practices?
Okay, good question. So Qigong is physical practice of energy work, if we can break it down that way. So chi is vital force, just like in yoga, we're talking about prana and vital energy. And gong simply means to cultivate and develop. So qi gong is qi development. And then Tai Chi is a martial expression of that cultivation. So those are kind of the differences in a simple way to understand between the two. They both require, it's a breath to movement practice. So there's a lot of mindful breathing, developing yin and yang energies, and really diving into the duality of energy work and of our existence. But they're mindful practices.
Mm-hmm. I think the first time I saw somebody practicing Tai Chi, I was in Hong Kong many moons ago and saw this beautiful, it's almost like this orchestrated dance that people are doing in their individual spaces, but it's really a beautiful practice. But there seems to be something that is almost like a universal connection. I don't know if I'm describing it correctly, but
it
stopped me in my track. I was a young person, with my briefcase going into a big steely skyscraper at the time, but it stopped me in my tracks at the beauty of this dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very fluid. So Tai Chi follows the Taoist principles of being connected with nature and being in flow with everything that is constantly in motion. The universe is in motion. Everything is in motion. On the microscopic level of our deeper selves in our bodies to the macro of all of the planets and everything moving above us. So it's tapping into, so what you were seeing is these people surrendering enough to be tapping into that flow, that energetic flow that surrounds us. And Tai Chi brings you to that place. There are mechanics to go through along the way as you start understanding the architecture of the movements and where to place your feet and your arms. So learning that first. And then at some point, you get to the point of letting go. You let go of what you know, and you surrender to what you saw was the flow.
Wow, that's a lovely explanation. I never heard it characterized that way before. Thank you. What are the benefits of doing a practice like this?
Any breath to movement practice, swimming, Tai Chi, yoga, golf, anytime you're linking a breath to movement, you're creating a neuromuscular synergy. When you do it in a repetitive way, and because Tai Chi is done in a slow, mindful way, when you do it in a repetitive way, you're activating and soothing your autonomous nervous system. So when your body is in that state of homeostasis, that biological state of equilibrium, it can heal. So whatever stagnation that you're experiencing in your body through pain, or for me, it was dealing with anxiety. So anxiety, again, lives in the nervous system. So it's finding a connection to your breath to just soothe your body, soothe your system so it can rest. We're driven individuals. We're overstimulated constantly. So these are practices that bring you back to a place where you can ground and allow your body to self-heal, because it knows what to do ultimately. It knows how to heal itself. You just have to give it the right forum to do it.
It gets back to your word that you used before of surrender, of almost getting out of our own way.
Exactly that. I don't know how many times my teachers have told me that, Rubia, you have to just get out of your own way. And for me, it's ongoing, but it's peaks and valleys. You reach certain valleys in your practice, and that are tied into whatever is going on externally, and you alchemize it. You work through it, but it has to be a mindful practice. You have to do it mindfully with clear intention, gentleness, and kindness with yourself. I think is really important. I think people forget to be kind to themselves and gentle with themselves while they're going through things, especially when it becomes really overwhelming. And these practices have helped me through, those stages of depression, anxiety, and just it's a place where I find comfort, and that's where my healing comes from. So that's why it's important for me to at least share the tools, and the work comes from practice, devotion, ritual, and, whatever you put in to anything, something will come out of it.
Can you think back to when you first started to practice? So you went there because of a physical stress or injury.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think back to when it began to dawn on you of, oh, wait, there's really some depth here, and you could see the difference in your life?
That's a really, really good question. A really good question. It goes deep into the process. One of the first ones for me in my experience, because it was related to my back. So my back would go out literally where I would have to be walking on my hands and knees. And I would sometimes pass out in the middle of the room just from exhaustion. So having done that over and over again, what I noticed once I could stand properly, what the Qigong practice was doing to me is when it did happen, because it did happen even after I started the Qigong, but when it did happen, the recovery time was shorter. That I did notice. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So then I paid attention to what was happening. So what was happening is I was just strengthening at a deeper cellular level, if that makes sense. I found a depth in my Qigong practice, and it was palpable. It became palpable and tangible. Like I could feel what was happening on a deeper level, as opposed to the bigger strength that was building. So I was building the strength in my legs and my pelvic floor. I knew that was happening, but I could feel something deeper under the surface of that was being developed and supporting like the bigger muscle, if you would. And it's very difficult to explain. Meridian and nadis and energy lines are difficult to explain because you can't see them. But when you develop these types of practices, you inevitably know that they're there. You feel that they're there. And something that I do in my online courses is I produce these visual videos of these energetic pathways, the meridians, so people could see, at least have the visual of how it moves, where it's moving, where it stops, where it connects. So that helps when you have the visual. When you can create a visual, that will definitely help develop the energetic support that's happening.
The meridian basically being like a highway or a pathway for energy. Is that fair?
Yes, exactly that.
What I find interesting about that story, well, there's so much there, but this sense of not having the words yet of what's happening to you, but you could feel it. And that you had to, getting back to that word surrender, you had to surrender and trust that whatever it is that you were doing, it was helping in some way. And so at some point you start to put this together, that this is why it's helping. Is that what propelled you to become a teacher?
I didn't want to teach. I fought it for a long time too. And I remember the conversation when you're dealing with family style forms like this, they're very intimate conversations that you have with your teachers about what's happening to you. So I've had numerous conversations with my teachers, and I remember him sitting me down one day very purposefully. I didn't know it then, but in hindsight, when I rewind how it all happened, it was very purposeful for him. And he sat me down and he said, "You're gifted, and the people who are gifted take things for granted. So they take for granted that it's easy, and it's not easy for everyone. So the challenge for people who are gifted is to teach, so you can relate more. So I've developed more compassion as I taught, And it was, for me, teaching was a tool of compassion. And I fought it for a long time. And he said that has to be part of your process is teaching. However it comes about, it just has to be part of your process. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't necessarily, he thought I was ready to receive that information because it was his timing. But for me, I wasn't, I heard him, but I didn't really, it took me, I think, a year or two after that to really start the process of teaching. I just fought it. I fight everything, but.
And why do you think that was, though? Could you not picture yourself doing that? Or is it just something you didn't want to do? What was the?
It was something I didn't want to do because these practices for me my yoga practice is a very personal practice. And although I've done teacher trainings, I don't teach it because when you teach, you ultimately have to give it away. Mm. And I was never, and I still am never, I'm not willing to give away my yoga practice. But I came to a point in my Tai Chi practice where I was like, okay, I can give this away. I'm not attached to it. It taught me non-attachment, I guess. So that was one of, the milestones that I remember having within myself to be like, okay, you can teach. But I was also very young as well. And I'm still considered a young teacher. And I just didn't feel at that time I had anything to share. I just didn't. And I still go in and out of it over the past 10 years of teaching because I need to step back and have some life experience and go through my own healing process and be immersed in it. So I'm very aware of what's going on with me internally. And then I go through my alchemical process. Then I'm able to share, but I have to take the time off to do that if I want to be authentic in what I'm sharing.
And I love that idea of teaching being this tool of compassion for you and of non-attachment, that there were big lessons going on there. Mm-hmm. In how you brought yourself to the situation, which I think is amazing. So looking back, you're 10 years into this now. If those were some of the initial reasons and lessons, how do you continue to grow into what you're teaching?
Wow, you have really good questions. Really deep questions. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it again? So you're basically asking me, okay, 10 years in, like what's different now? Because I've processed that part.
Exactly. So what are those edges that you're working against?
Well, I'm teaching differently now. So everything's kind of online now. And I'm still teaching a few students privately that have been with me for a long time. And so we're working on different things. I think over time, trying to answer your question as best as I can, over time, what I'm realizing and the beauty that I'm finding, I guess, and is really the separation of myself from the work itself. That to me has been a beautiful process because, and I'm sure a lot of people will relate if they're honest with themselves, we think everything kind of revolves around us sometimes, and it just doesn't. And it's getting out of your own way and getting over yourself and just digging into the work. And because they're centuries old, I lean into that and I trust that that's what needs to come through. And I'm just at this point, the messenger. That's been the beauty and the journey of separating and really transcending myself separate from the technology, the work, the tools. I don't know who I would be if I didn't do it. And maybe and most likely that's what my teacher saw and shared with me at that point in time, even if it was early in the game.
Wow, that's lovely. I don't know who I would be if I didn't have this practice. That's lovely.
If I didn't teach, I don't know who I would be personally for my own practice. I think I would be a very different person if I didn't have this practice, but that's for me. But if I didn't teach it, I don't yeah, I would be a different person. So it was important. It's an important part of my journey to be sharing it
Mm-hmm.
with other people.
And then there's this other leap, right? You talk about these ancient technologies that are centuries old of movement and of breath. And now you're marrying it up with 21st century technology that came out of necessity,
Right.
right? These last couple of years. So, what was that like? And what was your thought process as you're readying this information to try to keep that sense of substance? It's not just another YouTube video, right? This
Yeah.
is you trying to communicate something that is much, much deeper. You talk a little bit about that process.
Wow, your questions are blowing me away. I love your questions because they're very organic and spontaneous because you're we're in the moment right now, so it's really beautiful. It's been a challenge. The something does get lost in translation. Knowing that, I'm at a point where I have to rework some of the courses based on exactly what you just said, because something does get lost. There's an affinity that gets lost if it's not verbalized, and if you're not one-on-one, there's something that gets lost. And because I've always taught intuitively in the moment, these courses online have had to become a little bit more generic and simplified, very simplified. So I've been pulling from my teaching experience with beginners, remembering, certain people have come to mind, and just remembering where they were when they were in their beginning process, and remembering how to convey that information without being in front of them. So that's been difficult. But I keep in touch with students online. So if they have questions, they email me directly, or we have a Zoom or whatnot, and we kind of hash it out. But the spiritual aspect aside, if you just do the movements, if you just learn to do the mechanics, there's still so much benefit there. Even if you're not talking about the deeper spiritual lessons that kind of just cultivate along the way. They're spontaneous and organic and happen over time. Nothing is revealed. Everything is revealed spontaneously at the end, but it's because it's a repetition of something that's happened already.
Mm-hmm. There's two sides of this, right? First of all, you're able to reach people that you wouldn't have otherwise. That's its own alchemy, right?
Right, right.
And then there's this almost like a sorting process that somebody might try it, maybe it doesn't work for them. But the ones where something resonates, much like something resonated for you, those are the ones that are going to seek out that
exactly.
one-on-one. So it's quite an exercise to have to try to translate. And I can empathize with what a task that is.
Yeah, thank you for even bringing that up, or trying to decipher that, because it's ongoing. I'm still trying to figure certain things out, to make sure that the information is being related in, again, a more general sense.
Well, let's talk about the opposite of that, and doing these practices out in nature. Tell me some of your favorite places to practice and what that adds to the practice itself.
Well, we spoke a little bit about it earlier, and just understanding that everything is in motion, and tapping into the spontaneous and organic expression of everything around you. I think nature is the best place to be when you're practicing these types of movements. And that's why you see people doing Tai Chi in the park more often than not. Although before recording this, I was doing Tai Chi in my living room, which is fine too. But we are nature. Our bodies are part of the earth. We're not separate from the earth. We can barely lift up, a feet or two for moments before we're brought back down. So we're part of the earth, and it's our responsibility to come back to being in flow with her. I say her, Mother Earth. when we're moving with the wind, when we're moving with the water, I mean, doing Tai Chi in the ocean or doing Tai Chi in water is also a beautiful place to practice. You're even more connected and tapped into that flow of, everything being in motion. I mean, that's why I think we practice in nature. It's to come back to that source and that feeling, because it feels different when you practice in your living room than when you practice outside, for sure.
So one of the things that I'm curious of, because this image kind of popped into my head as you were talking, so I can picture you practicing at the ocean and it feels a particular way. What happens if you took that same practice and you were among, say, redwoods? So you're in the middle of this deep redwood forest with these towering trees. Is the energy the same because it's earth energy? Or is it different because one is flowing and one is more still and ancient? Like, is there a difference depending on where you are in the world?
Wow, what a great question. It's a great question because I've experienced both. I mean, I live in Southern California and I've visited the redwoods, sequoias many times, and I've done Tai Chi amongst the sequoias. The feeling, oh wow, the feeling is different. Absolutely. If you're doing Tai Chi in water, you're definitely moving differently because there's a slight resistance. So that kind of helps you dig deeper into your body, into your movement. And then doing Tai Chi with in the woods with the sequoias, I felt earth and air at the same time, or earth and wind. You do connect to the earth more deeply, and you feel. I mean, I felt the roots of the trees moving with me. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
It is.
It definitely
it was a
does.
different experience.
It's so funny because it almost, like, the image that I was getting, like in your body, your blood flow is your blood flow. Like, it doesn't matter if it's in your hand or if it's in your leg, like it's your blood,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about energy, but when you're talking about energy of the earth, you do feel different when you're in different places. Being in that forest is a very still grounding. You can get that from the ocean too, but it's just more energetic.
It is more fluid because you're definitely in more of that motion. But what the redwoods requires is for you to listen more deeply and feel more deeply. So you're not the water is kind of like going with you and sweeping you up, but the woods and the sequoias require you to like listen to them so you can tap into them a little more deeply. So it was a different experience for sure. And then the Grand Canyon was a whole other experience as you're flowing across the horizon. There's a movement that's called change is difficult. And you're moving across the horizon and all you're seeing is the Grand Canyon. It was just spectacular. It's a beautiful practice because you can take it anywhere. You don't need a yoga mat. You can just really, you can be spontaneous with your Tai Chi, which I love. And doing Tai Chi in the desert, like Joshua Tree amongst like the big boulders and the cactus was a different experience as well, but more relatable to the trees and the sequoias. But nature is important. It's one of the most important pieces of Taoist philosophy and the Tai Chi practice for sure.
Beautiful. I'll be thinking about that. I'm actually starting a personal writing course I'm attending, and it's all based on nature. And each week is a different environment that we'll be exploring and what it means. And you said something really beautiful of, the redwoods require you to listen more deeply. And I'm getting a sense that depending on where, and I take my writing practice like you take your Tai Chi practice. Everywhere I go, I write old school with a notebook. And so it will be very interesting to see what the parallels are with what you've explained and what we're learning. So thank you so much
Oh,
for sharing that. I appreciate it.
oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with me.
We're going to go through some questions for you with our dose of inspiration and get your contact information. But before we do, is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you would like to share with our audience?
You know, have the experience of Qigong and Tai Chi. Even if you do it just once, anyone who's come to class and has never come back, it has even shared with me that it was a beautiful experience. You know, there's something to be discovered, and discovery is probably a key word as well in this practice. Is you're just constantly discovering something new. Which is beautiful, because then it's never ending. And that's why they call them life practices, because you're always finding these little jewels depending on where you're at in life. So I would say give it a try. When we partake in our own healing, we help heal others, and take care of your little world around you, whatever that cosmos is. Don't think about the whole world, just think about taking care of yourself, so the 3 or 5 people around you can be better human beings. I would say start there, and it just expands outward. It's nature. It's a physical phenomenon. Whatever you do will affect someone else. So be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, be forgiving of yourself, cultivate compassion for yourself. And all of those things that you've cultivated within and for you will expand outward. It has to. There's nowhere else to go but out. So
beautiful. Start small and radiate out. I love it.
Yes. That's the whole work. That's the whole process of this,
Beautiful. We always wrap up with a segment that we call Dose of Inspiration, some questions for our listeners to get to know you a little bit more. And one of the things I'm curious about is what you've read or listened to lately that you've enjoyed.
Well, I've been studying astrology. So that has been another great tool of compassion for me, is understanding the stars and understanding people's natal blueprints in the cosmos, and just understanding that, we're all different. We're all going through something, and it'll happen at different moments in time, and everything's temporary. And right now I'm digging into Cosmos and the Psyche by Richard Tarnas, which is, I've just started. So it's a beautiful book. And it talks about, the oracle of what cosmology and astrology is, and planets and all that stuff. So I'm diving into my astrology these days. So listening to Astrology Hub and the Astrology Podcast. And yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Excellent. And envision your perfect road trip. Where would you go? What would you do?
Well, I've taken a lot of really great road trips. So I would probably go back to the Grand Canyon. I think you can never have enough of that place. And the drive there is quite beautiful. Road trips are meditative for me, which can be a little bit dangerous if I zone out. I'm driving on the open road, so I always have to be careful. But yeah, there's nothing like a good road trip. And I enjoy my own company, so I find myself alone a lot, but I'm not lonely in that sense. So I'm good with like 4 or 5 hour road trips on my own. I've driven across the country twice on my own. So I do like road trips. And there's a lot of beauty here in the US.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And then what has you optimistic about the future?
Ooh, that's a tough question in this time.
Why I asked it.
Yeah. I have to think about that. What has me optimistic? I think technology, as much as it hinders us, if you use it to your advantage, it will help. So in small doses and very focused, find your tribe, find the people who speak your language, or find the people whose language you want to learn from and grow from. I mean, we have access to so much right now. So I'm hopeful that will help us keep connected even more. I see more people trying to change the world. So that's hopeful. I have hope there. And I have to say, even just a few years ago, I didn't have that hope. So, but I see it more now because I see more people through to change. So technology has given me that hope.
Beautiful. Perfect. And tell me, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you? How can they reach out to you?
So as I was mentioning earlier, I have some courses online. I have Tai Chi fundamentals and I have Qigong for grounding, and I'm working on a couple of more. And my website is, well, there's two ways you can find it. So there's taichiwellness.online. So Tai Chi, TAICHI wellness altogether .online. And that'll bring you to Wei Wu Tai Chi .online. Which you can access directly as well. So Wei Wu, WEIWUTAICHI .online. So my courses are there. And for your listeners, they can access the Qigong for Grounding course for free by using the VIP code Athena Qigong. So Athena, TATHENA, Qi, QI, GONG. So you'll have it in your show notes.
I'll link it up in the show notes. Okay. Yeah, no problem.
So they can have access to that and have the experience and take it from there.
Excellent. And there may be rows of Athena Wellness listeners at the Grand Canyon to greet you someday. We'll see how that all turns out. But such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time.
Kathy, it was wonderful. Again, you had really beautiful, insightful, and deep questions that I really appreciated. And that just says a lot about you.
Oh, thank you. Picking up on your energy. Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.